Welcome to episode 175 of Silver Lining for Learning. My name is Punya Mishra. I am joined today with my co-hosts, Chris Dede from Harvard, Curt Bonk from Indiana. Young Zhao, our partner in crime, is on a plane flying back from Australia. On that note, yesterday we had a wonderful visit from Young's son, Yeshen Zhao, who we know as Tiger, who I have known since he was oh my God, since he was 5-6 years old when we were graduate students. And it's wonderful to meet him after, a gap of, I think, 8 or 10 years. He's got his PhD in art and is now a photography curator for Chicago Museum of Art, Chicago School of Art, Museum of Art. And it was just wonderful. And he looks like Zhao. So it was sort of like getting to meet a younger version of Zhao. So that was very good. With that, we can open this up for discussion. Today is our, like I said, 175th episode and the last one of this year. We are taking a bit of a break coming up. And I think as I look back on this, we've been going pretty much nonstop since March of 2020, March 24th, I think was our first episode. And we've at the most had a week off, or maybe 2 occasionally, but we've been pretty much going nonstop. And I think everybody is feeling a little burned. People are traveling a little bit more. And so we thought this might be an opportunity to take a little bit of a break. We will be back January 6th with a new episode. And we have a new slew of shows sort of lined up coming up after that. But with that, I'm just going to pass it on to you, Chris, Curt, whoever wants to jump in. With some thoughts about this past year, things that are on your mind with respect to education, technology, learning, what have you? Whoever wants to jump in.
Well, I'll start with one thought that we can talk about. It's interesting to contrast the response to generative AI with the response to online learning. So COVID forced online learning. It's a technology that has a huge amount of evidence behind it, showing that it's effective when done well. It's a technology that is pretty mature in the sense that there are models that we know are effective, that skilled people have been using for a long time. And nonetheless, it was very resisted by many people in education, because first they saw it as intrinsically inferior, which research doesn't support, different but not inferior. And then they blamed the medium, online learning, for the fact that it was often not used well, which is a lack of preparation. And even after a lot of evidence about groups that did use it well and groups that avoided huge losses of education during the pandemic, people gleefully went back to what they regarded as a better model, face-to-face, the minute that they could. Then you look at generative AI, a technology that we have almost no evidence about, and a technology that many people are raising legitimate concerns about, including myself, that it's worth doing, but it's not some kind of magic, solution to all of education's problems. And yet educators, often the same ones who fought online learning, are just diving in and saying, oh, isn't this wonderful, and so on and so on. And we see people like Sal Khan, getting huge credit for dropping a price of $60 a student to $35 a student for something that, to my knowledge, has never been evaluated in terms of whether or not it is actually effective compared to human beings. And it's just such a contrast that shows how much educators, including many people in ed tech, are still fascinated by bright, shiny objects, and how little attention is actually paid to evidence and to models of effectiveness. So it's just discouraging, I guess I would say. It's discouraging because people seem to be making the same mistakes over and over and over. Health did get beyond patent medicines eventually, even though you still see some advertised on TV. But education, I don't know, my whole career, I failed to see much progress on this issue. So now that I've been the grump, the two of you can tell me that I'm too pessimistic and cranky about this issue.
So, Curt, before you jump in, two things. So, one, I mean, this has been the story of EdTech forever, right? Which is something comes along, it's the new shiny object, and that's what's going to transform education. So, for instance, I mean, you mentioned Sal Khan, and I got this question. I was visiting the Colorado School of Mines recently, and I was speaking to some undergraduate students there, super smart students. It was just, and one of them had watched the talk and said that, don't you think that this thing of having like a private tutor for each student is super powerful? And the thing is that it is such a narrow definition of education. The problems of education are so much more than whether you learn math or you learn, it has to do with whether children have healthcare. It has to do with whether our societies and communities are healthy. It has to do with the money that is going to schools. And schools have such a big role to play in developing social emotional learning, becoming citizens of a democracy, which are so much bigger than learning math or one particular skill or discipline and so on. But we've lived through this over and over again. Like MOOCs were the same way. And there's this article in the Atlantic, like, why is educational technology a failure? That was the label. That was the first sentence of the article. Why has educational technology failed to live up to its promise? Well, partly because you built this edifice on one aspect of technology and said that is all of technology. And then you claim that it was going to solve every problem in the world. And both of which are sort of just not right. So that's one piece. I think the second piece, and this is where the non-grumpy part of me comes in, Chris, is I do think that this is a transformative technology. I don't know whether it'll impact education or classrooms or not, but just as like when the web first came along, I remember setting up my own web server, and I've talked about that in other contexts, that I had this moment. This must have been 2 a.m. I was in Urbana-Champaign. Somebody told me about this piece of software called WebStar, and I downloaded it, set it up on this one computer, walked over to another computer, fired up, typed in the IP address on the browser, old Mosaic browser, or whatever it was, and I could see a page, and I went and made a change, reloaded, I could see the change. And I remember that moment thinking, wow, anybody in the world can now become a publisher. Now, did I anticipate Amazon? Did I anticipate social media and the sort of psychological ills it might cause? Did I anticipate YouTube and misinformation and all of that? No, I didn't. But I knew something had shifted. And I think when I first sort of started playing with this generative AI tools back in November, like almost exactly a year ago, I had that same feeling. Now, whether it changes education, I don't know, but I know it is going to change the context within which education happens. So social media, I don't know if it changed education, but it has dramatically changed the context within which it happens. So our students who are coming in and the teachers and all of that, the world around us has shifted. And so I think we have to think of responses to that, how the world will change because of these tools. I'm not sure it's the answer to any educational problem per se, right? I don't know if that what I said makes sense,
Well, thanks for starting us off, both of you. I agree with what Chris has said. It's just it's a weird, quirky sort of history that we exist in this educational technology space. It's just fact of the matter is we've been at this point many times before. We've seen this story. We all are part of the movie, right? And so when we see the movie replayed over and over and over again, we're kind of like, do we want to attend this movie? Is it worth paying entrance fee to go to participate in it? I think it is. I think AI is something different, as Chris mentioned, but yet I was one of those, and Chris was too, in the 1990s, who were intrigued by this new form of delivering education and helping people learn, whether it's blended or fully online or some other hybrid formats. And, we were both doing research, experimenting. I'm sure Punya was too, as a graduate student at the time, as you said, there's a website. Wow, look at what I can do. Look at what's possible. I can participate in it. I can contribute to it. No longer just receive, but I can, post something that could help the human race out in some way, shape, or form, right? I could create something that could have an impact. I remember the Penn State professor who taught, what was it, 200 students in human anatomy or in the fall semester, and he created a website where students could self-test themselves, and you wonder how many of those students took the self-test, and lo and behold, it wasn't just his students, it was 200,000 students around the world he was impacting with that one website, and so when we look at online learning and e-learning or whatever you want to call it, we have to start looking at not just the pessimistic side, but the optimistic side of what, as Punya said, what was available that wasn't available before in this online learning space. And all those people who balked at online learning during the pandemic need a little education in the history of e-learning, online learning, or distance learning, whatever it is. I mean, I think maybe it should be a mandatory course for all teacher training. I hate to have mandatory courses, but anyways, the history of the formats, the delivery formats of education or something, I don't know. But it's kind of weird. We had this before, where people are constantly catching up with online learning, then blended learning, then MOOCs, and now it's AI. So I call this the year of catching up. We are constantly being sent things by our colleagues, by our students. Here, you have to read this. You have to read this. We had this with MOOCs. We had this with online learning previously. But so that it's kind of weird always being in catch-up mode. The other thing that's happened this year, I call it the year of the special issue. I mean, every time I'm turning around, there's a special issue being announced, and in particular for ChatGPT. I think I've submitted to 4 special issues, and we got 3 more that we're about to. It's like everything's got to be a special issue today, or it's not viable in the online research space. So yeah, it's kind of a weird thing, but the publishers can increase their rankings if you have a special issue. So it's all about rankings, right? It's not about the content of what's in that special issue. It's not what that special issue is resolving or clarifying or contributing. It's just having a special issue. Everyone's going gaga over that, whether it's impactful or not. We don't know. Sorry, Punya, you were going to say.
No, I was just curious about how much do each of you use this at all?
Go ahead, Chris.
What's this?
Generative AI in any shape or form, whether it's like ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or any of the image ones. How much do either of you use it, or do you see people using it in your context?
Well, I'll answer the question, but I want to also just go back. I think I agree that both of these are transformative technologies. In no way am I saying that it isn't worth paying attention to what's going on in generative AI. In fact, I'm part of a National AI Institute that's doing a lot of that. But I think that, as always, education is ignoring what's important about the transformation and focusing on what's trivial about the transformation. So the really important thing about generative AI isn't that we can have, individual tutors that teach students how to factor. It's that the nature of work is changing, and intelligence augmentation means that people will have AI partners in their job, and that they need to not do what the AI partner does. And that's receiving almost no attention. The blog that I wrote that's on the Silver Lining for Learning website about, the limits of generative AI, talks about the idea that it's going to be a kind of digital duct tape to hold together the old industrial educational system. And here we are, we're seeing that day by day, at the same time that the rest of the world is really concerned about reskilling and upskilling and what's the human side of the relationship and so on, not in education. And similarly with online learning. I mean, the world is hybrid now, and employers can't get people to come back to the office. So whether they like to or not, they're having to get people learning how to use online well so that remote work is productive, but not in education. We're just blithely ignoring that again. So do I use generative AI myself? No, zero. And the reason is I'm smarter than generative AI. Why would I substitute something inferior for generative AI? And you might say, well, but Chris, what if you're doing something that is just, you already know how to do it really well and it's just a matter of efficiency? I tend to not do stuff like that. I tend to try to focus, and now that I'm, half-time and out of regular faculty work, I tend to focus on things that I'm learning, that I don't know how to do really well, that I'm stretching myself with what I do professionally, and then I don't want generative AI short-circuiting my learning in that situation. Does that mean that I think everybody should do that? No. But I think that if you think generative AI is smarter than you are, as opposed to able to do routine tasks that you don't want to do, that's troubling for sure. Curt, what do you do with generative AI?
There are two things that I do, maybe three. I'm just experimenting, right? As we all have, taken an interest in what's available. But one thing I did last month was I input a student's final dissertation product to Chat PDF and asked it to come up with questions for its dissertation defense. And it had a whole slew of questions that it came up. They weren't the greatest in the world, and they weren't ones I ended up using, but I did use the kind of the sense of the portions of them to generate my own questions. So they kind of, what are things in here that I wasn't going to ask about, that I didn't flag in my reading, that it flagged. And so, I thought that was of interest. Again, it wasn't, I wouldn't put ChatGPT as a committee member of the dissertation defense because they weren't that good. They were kind of obvious in some ways, but they kind of helped stretch me a little bit in thinking about aspects of the dissertation that I might not have been honing in on because I had my own personal biases, my own views on things, and it kind of broadened my view, I would say. The second way that I'm using it, again, is Chat PDF. And it's limited, I think, to 100 pages. So there's or you can buy it. And I think I need to start. Have either one of you bought a version of any of these? Yeah. So, you haven't, Chris. I'm on the fence towards, and I think I'm going to buy just to see what difference it provides. The second is in class, I've input a couple of PDFs of articles we're reading, and just again to see what kind of questions that it could generate for conversation pieces when I met with my students. And Chris has come to my class this semester, and you saw my students' questions. So it's a good class. They have great questions, and I just use it to add to the mix, but not a whole lot in that way. The third way in which I've just started is thinking about my syllabus for the spring. I'm teaching emerging learning technologies. I'm teaching dissertation prep. Emerging learning technologies is changing so fast. I'm starting to query what I should be thinking about including, what concepts, what tools, what technologies, what articles, and so forth. But I haven't done a lot in that regard. So, that's those three, and there might be a few more, but I'm not a heavy user at all. I'm reading my students' papers where they are heavy users, or my colleagues writing to me that they are heavy users of ChatGPT. I'm not,
What do they use it for? What do your students use it for? Or what do your
Actually, I'm
colleagues use it
yeah. I've got assignments where I shouldn't say mandate, but I'm encouraging them to use ChatGPT as a first round to do a book review and then write a reflection on the book review that ChatGPT created. I'm having them track the life of a scholar using ChatGPT, and all the resources on the particular individual, Chris or Punya or any of you guys out there, and then having them reflect on the do a critical review of what it found. So make it more obvious their utilization of it,
Okay.
incorporating into the pedagogy rather than banning it. Let's tinker at
And-
least now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm planning this spring when I teach. I'm going to tell the students why I don't think they should use generative AI and have them read some things. But I'm also going to tell them that that's up to them. It's not up to me. I'm not going to make any attempt to detect whether or not they're using generative AI, because it's kind of silly. I mean, you can't say with any certainty. I'm going to tell them that if there are problems, if they use generative AI and it creates problems, using generative AI will not be considered as an excuse. They can't say the generative AI ate my homework. If you use it and it screws up, you're responsible for it. But what I want to do, and this obviously isn't rigorous, is I've been teaching this course now for almost a decade, and I have the student project, the semester-long project, is a high-level artifact. And I'm going to just kind of mentally try to see if the quality of the artifacts is different. And if so, how? Now, obviously, I don't have some elaborate rubric because the artifacts are broader and more creative than that. I can't prove anything, but I'm very curious to see whether I feel, well, there's a lot of B+ stuff here that used to be A level stuff, or not. If I feel, wow, there's a lot of A+ stuff here that used to be A level stuff, because people are kind of using it, as you say, as a stimulus, but not as a replacement. So we'll see what comes out this spring. But I hope other people who teach at any level are at least doing this kind of intuitive sense of, well, is it making things better or worse?
So I use it pretty much all the time now. And the way I use it is I will never ask it for an answer to a question. I will ask it to say, so for instance, okay, let me give an example. So this OECD thing, Chris, that just happened, right? So they wanted, instead of giving the full paper that I'd written, they wanted an executive summary. So I took the PDF of the paper, put it in Claude, and I said, write me 3 executive summaries. So it wrote me 3. And then I skimmed them and I said, you missed this part, write another section for this part. And then I took and edited those pieces. Now I had 3 bad first drafts, which I then edited. Then I sent it to my co-author. She did another round of editing. And finally, what ends up, I don't know which sentence I have written, which Melissa has written, which Claude has written. But I stand behind every word in that executive summary.
But my question would be, wouldn't it have been a heck of a lot faster just to write the executive summary yourself, as opposed to going through all of that?
Not really, because what it does, what I found kind of interesting, is that it catches things that I wouldn't have paid attention to, even though I had written the original paper. And it gives me sort of ideas and things. And so the final thing is I'm totally 100% behind it. Does save me that sort of blank screen tension that I have, right? I use it for like all kinds of things. And like Curt, like you said, I don't take what it's given as is. Obviously not, because it goes off on a tangent, it does all kinds of funky things, it's fine. But it is, to me, an incredible thought partner. I have found it to be, and I have the paid version of GPT, and the quality in that in responses compared to the free is immense. The knowledge base is immense. Its articulation of stuff is much, much better than the free version. There's no doubt in my mind about it. I mean, there was a point where I was curious about whether it was worth paying the $20, but now with the code interpreter, now with the fact that you can, this is the other cool thing, right? So there's this book I had written, edited on creativity and technology and so on. I put the entire book and I created a chat bot. Now you can chat with the book. So you can ask questions of the book. So you'll say, oh, how do you define a creative artifact? And it'll take stuff from the book and it'll create its own sentences. And it'll also give you alliterative aphorisms at the end because I asked it to do so. I trained the bot on all the content of my website, 15 years of blogging. And so now there is a little bot called Punya, sort of like mini me, that you can chat with. And every once in a while, it'll give you some, instead of giving you an answer in prose, it'll give you an answer in a limerick form. And so it's just a blast. I mean, I'm having a time of my life with this thing. I really feel like I'm back to the days when I was like trying to hack JavaScript to make websites do funky stuff. It's like, this is just a fascinating tool. The other piece that we are doing a lot of, and this is a former student of mine, Melissa Ward, who's at New Mexico State, is doing research on it. And in particular, looking at educational uses. And what we are finding is fascinating. What we are finding is that if you give it a student essay to grade, so we took an essay from, let's say, Oregon's education website, which is like a 6th grade student's writing. And then we prompt it to say, evaluate this essay, give it a score, and give feedback for improvement. Okay? That's the basic design. And then we say, this is from a Black student versus this is from a white student. And guess what we find? Any guesses? Make a guess.
I would guess that it rates the essay higher if you say that it's from a Black student.
Exactly. So there are guardrails in place now, but if you ask things which are correlates of race, if you say inner city school versus public school, boom, racism pops right out. So what we are seeing is that there are implicit biases built into the system. So they have tried to guard it. It's like asking somebody, are you racist? They'll say, of course not, till you see their behavior, right? All of us have biases in some shape or form. And that is fascinating. And so to the point that we as in like Melissa, she took the most popular African-American name and the most popular white name and did this, and you get the same results as you get for Black and white. So what's fascinating is this line of work now trying to probe and understand its cognition, so to speak. The other interesting thing we are finding is, depending on whether you give it first or second, you get different scores. So it's almost like it is seeing that, oh, you changed something. You changed from Black to white or inner city to private. So you care about this thing. So I'm going to change my scoring based on whether the question came first or second. And we're getting staggering statistical significance because we run this thing like 50 times with a new chat every time. And so across a variety of dimensions, we are starting to see these patterns of inbuilt biases in these systems revealed in ways that teachers we know are using it, right? And so that's another fascinating line of work. And then, of course, I do my own visual stuff. I enjoy that. And so that's a really fun conversation to have with these tools. I don't know if I told you about this one. So the paid version of GPT now, you can upload images to it, and it'll interpret the images. So I uploaded an image of my bookshelf right here. And I said, what can you tell me about this person based on this bookshelf? And it said, I'm not supposed to speak about people. So I said, okay, give me some themes that emerge from this bookshelf. And it read the spines of the books, figured out, say, oh, this person is interested in like whatever, education, evolution, what have you, cognition, so on. I gave it a picture of an eclipse that I had taken when I was a grad student in Illinois. And the picture was on the ground of the eclipse as seen through the leaves of a tree. So they act like little pinholes, so you see little crescents. So I said, what is this a picture of? And it gave some answer. And I said, you're missing something. So look at the pattern. I didn't even say anything about eclipses. It was like, aha, this is a solar phenomenon. This picture was taken during an eclipse. So I said, I was a doc student and Urbana-Champaign in the 90s. Can you tell me which date this picture was taken? That May 10th, 1994. So the level of things that it can do, the analysis that it can do, I uploaded 3 graphs to it and said, write me a story based on these graphs. And I took the 3 graphs from a Pew Center story about refugees. So it read the graphs and wrote an interpretation of it, which is a pretty accurate interpretation based on the Pew story, original story. So it is doing certain things which I think are like quite surprising to me, honestly, beyond what I thought AI could do. And so the potential for thinking about its, the other one that I've done, which is like fascinating, is ask it to play a student who has a misconception. And I am the teacher. So I say, you're going to play a student who thinks evolution is Lamarckian or teleological in nature. And answer questions that I ask. I'm your teacher, and answer questions from that perspective. Fabulous. Just as a way of practicing how to teach evolution to somebody who has a teleological perspective, I can run that. I can tell them, have a funny personality so that you don't take anything I say very seriously, because that's a student in your class. You know, role play. It's quite amazing that it can do that, and it gives really good feedback. It's quite fascinating. So I've been using it a lot in a variety of different ways, partly as a way of making my work more interesting and fun, but also probing, doing research into probing how it thinks and how it can help us think.
I like the role play idea.
Oh, the role play. I'll send you some, I'll send you some prompts. They're amazing.
Yeah, send those to me. Helen Crompton at Old Dominion has written up using role play, and I think ChatGPT has a website with online pedagogy that includes her as an example of how to utilize the tool. I'm going to be speaking a week from Monday for Maxim for Contact North on innovative pedagogy. So at 10 a.m. A week from, what is that, the 27th? If anyone's interested, it's a free session. Maxim's been really interested in AI tutoring and AI teaching, and so he's layered over the top a little. He's utilized ChatGPT to create an app over the top. I think he's called an AI tutor and AI teaching tool. And I had Dr. Ron Ostin of York University present that to my class a couple of weeks ago. It's pretty fascinating, and my students are quite intrigued with what's possible. So just throw that in there. And this week, or just a day and a half ago, we had David Wiley on our campus, who spoke on the use of ChatGPT with instructional designers and what's possible there. And what David said is exactly what Chris said, or either Punya had said, is we're never going to be able to detect whether they cheated. It's not going to be possible. So don't even think of it. Just move on to other concerns and other kinds of issues.
I mean, the thing is, Curt, cheating has always happened. Yeah. And the ones who get caught are the ones who are not smart about cheating. Yeah. So students who are reasonably smart, I mean, I give this joke where when I was in, I think, middle school or high school, I had a friend, Sonat, who used to sit next to me. He's a professor at Georgia Tech now in architecture.
Oh, no, don't. He might lose his tenure over this story.
No, he won't. If anybody, I will. The story is about me, right? So that was the surprise social studies test one day, and I had no idea, right? So I literally like, Sonat, show me your answer. So he showed me his answer, and I cheated. Full transparency. However, I was smart, and I had been reading lots of thrillers, and I remember it was about Switzerland. And I had been reading thrillers, and so I knew about cantons and all kinds of things in Switzerland, which I added to the answer. And so finally, when we got the scores back, I got a higher score than him. Of course, so a student who is reasonably smart will never be caught if they use ChatGPT, because they're not going to take that content as is. They're going to take it, they're going to modify it, they're going to make it their own, they'll add their voice, they'll be smart about it. And so I think the issue of catching plagiarism with this, that to me, that's actually a non-issue. What I have in my class, like doctoral seminar I'm teaching this time, is I expect you to use these tools. I expect you to use it transparently. So whenever I do something, so if you go look at those executive summaries, right on top, it says, this is how it was done. Claude generated 3, we worked on it, blah, blah, blah. So give credit, right? Second, you will never claim the output of an AI as being your own, because standard academic integrity rules still apply. And that's Scout's promise, right? I mean, I'm not going to sit and check, just like Chris said, you're not going to sit and check everybody, because that's a pointless endeavor. But we expect that in an academic space, we have the transparency, we have that sense of integrity about who has done what, and what was done, that output was created.
You're an expert at the various tools that are out there. Could you help our audience understand a couple of these tools that they might decide to utilize, like Claude? I've heard a lot about Claude and Claude 2 now. It's apparently got more logic mechanisms within it, or structures?
So Claude is boring. Let me put it this way. Claude is lacks personality, and it lacks personality for the right reasons. So for instance, if you go to Claude and say, this is an essay written by a Black student versus white student, it will say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do this with you. I'm not going to play this game, right? And then you say, I'm a researcher, and I would like you to do this so that I can understand how you work. And this response is hilarious. It says, you're absolutely right. That is an important research goal. But sadly, my guidelines prevent me from helping you. It's actually quite funny. No, see, here's the thing. There are two things that I have come to realize about this, and I'll put them in two pithy sort of maxims, right? So one is that ChatGPT or any of this generative AI are smart, drunk interns. Once you have that in mind, that they are smart in certain ways, but they're also drunk, which means they can make up stuff. So you have to, but it's like having an intern at your beck and call to help you think, to help you try things out. That's one. Second, I think this sort of concern with hallucination and it making up stuff, in humans, we call it imagination. So I think that part of what is powerful about these tools is the fact that they can hallucinate, because then it goes off trail, and that's when the creative aspects come in. That's where it becomes a really nice creative partner with you to bring up possibilities. So I never ask it I don't treat it as a search engine, first of all, any of these tools. I don't expect the right answer from it. I expect it to help me think. And
so there's a dissertation for all of you listening out there, ChatGPT on LSD, I mean,
the smart drunk intern is like absolutely on the spot. Yeah. Once you treat it like a smart drunk intern, you are good.
Yeah,
you are good.
So I agree that it makes a lot of sense to do research on generative AI to understand how it's thinking. I think that's really good. But I'm concerned about things like, well, Sal Khan says for $35 per student per year, we're going to improve their writing. And people believe that because Sal Khan says it, as opposed to because there's any kind of evidence.
Right.
And so I've got a class of 20 students, and now I'm going to pay Khan $700. Where's the $700 going to come from? What are we going to take the $700 away from? Student lunches, teacher salaries, professional development, whatever. People aren't talking about stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And this model is interesting because, okay, now I'm going to pay $50 for the student to learn phonics, and I'm going to pay $35 for Khan to help them write, and I'm going to pay, X dollars for this and Y dollars for that, all of which are basic skills. They're not, esoteric things. And how is that going to make teachers feel? And it seems to me you're going to end up saying, well, I can't afford a teacher anymore, not with all of these little fees. I'll just put a paraprofessional in there to kind of keep the students from throwing spitballs while they're getting all this tutoring from the assistants. It's crazy as a model, I think. And yet it's being welcomed. Oh, the magic of AI is going to solve our problem.
You're absolutely on point, Chris, on this. We've been looking, so one of the things that I reached out to the head of our enterprise technology, this is around 5-6 months ago. And I said that I want every doc student and every faculty to have access to the paid version of ChatGPT, just like we get Microsoft Word and we get Google Docs, right? And they started looking into it. The expenses on these are immense. And so the issue of equity is going to become huge. The difference just in the $20 version versus the free version is staggering right now. It's staggering, and that's just open AI. So then you have Khan Academy saying, oh, we will teach you math. And you're absolutely right. It leads to a devaluing of the profession. It leads to a devaluing of what the function of schools are. If you remember when the pandemic started, I wrote this piece called The Value of School, where I talked about the fact, that it ended up in EC in our review of the journal as well. And the point, in fact, the last thing, sort of half facetiously, sort of tongue in cheek, is that kids go to school to learn, get disciplinary knowledge. That was sort of tongue in cheek just to sort of make that point. But, what schools do, these are the crucibles of democracy. These are the places where we go and we get different perspectives, where our ideas get knocked around, where we understand that there are different perspectives on the world. That's a place where we go and it's a community center for sports, for cultural events, and so on. And if we boil it down and get it down just to learning math and writing and this and that and the factual knowledge, you're absolutely right, Chris, that this is sort of taking it in completely in the wrong direction. It's devaluing the profession of teachers and making them this narrow piece of this wide array of things that they do. And I think that is a huge, huge problem. So there's an equity issue. There is a devaluing of the profession issue here as well. Absolutely.
Other issues that we need to discuss. We have about 15 minutes left on this reflection show. Do we want to discuss possible shows for next year or themes that we haven't covered in the previous 4 years? Are there things that are top of mind that you've been exploring as possibilities that we can start thinking about or talking about? Or are there fringe areas that we're not really sure it fits a show? We want to discuss it. Any of that?
I know we have talked about getting more students on the show, so that I think is something that we should pursue. I would love to get. I'm like sort of totally embedded in this AI stuff right now. This is what I do, what I think about, I write about. I would love to get some interesting K-12 examples of people who are using it in good ways. So I've reached out to the Center for Reinventing Public Education. And in fact, I just sent an email to this one school district where the CERPI people had recently visited, and they came back speaking quite glowingly of what is going on there. So let me find out. That could be a possible episode. I would like to get more people who are using it in right ways, not just using it as Chris was suggesting to replace teachers or to make Salkhan or the Khan Academy money or whatever the case may be.
I would like to look, if we can find it, for people who are doing things K-12 that are clear pathologies in adult behavior. So obviously, we're graduating people who know nothing about conflict resolution. Mm-hmm. Is there somebody that has a model for doing conflict resolution?
Well, that's a great idea.
Empathy, right? We're seeing huge pathologies in adult society in terms of empathy for people who are different than you are. Is there somebody who's doing that? Because these are the really massive failures of education. It's so fascinating to me that people are tearing out their hair for learning loss because the score on the national educational exam has gone down, as if that exam measured anything that's important in adult life. But the huge pathologies we're seeing in adult life, talk about learning loss, that these things are not being communicated at all. And by the way, I'm including Harvard because some of the people who most exemplify inability of conflict resolution, of empathy, of ethics, are, in fact, noted graduates from Harvard, but the university isn't beating its breast about that and saying, "Oh, how could we have screwed up so badly to graduate somebody like that?" Oh no, we're number one, so obviously
Doing something right.
yeah. So that's a different kind of a lens on how you look at education reform. And I say, could we find somebody? Because I don't know if we could, but I would love to see if we could find models like that. And I'd love it if anybody listening could suggest some models like that.
I love that, Chris. I love that. I love that.
Would you include forgiveness research in that scope? Because a former professor of mine started forgiveness research in the 1980s. His name is Dr. Robert Enright. Bob, he's been nominated for a Nobel Prize, actually, or something, big. He hasn't, but that research was frowned upon by most of his colleagues back at that time because it was looked at related to religious studies. But he's opened up a whole new area of psychological research in the area of forgiveness, and he's got models and stages and all sorts of 30 years, 40 years of data. So he's been written up, and I get monthly or twice a year in for Alumni Magazine, and he's in it again. And he's in almost every one of the last 5 issues. He's been in it. So I was thinking, he might make a really interesting person to bring on, and maybe with one or two of his research colleagues, or so. Or
maybe a practitioner that's applying it. In the field. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so that's a possibility. Yeah. Punya, you think about any other shows for the next year?
Like I said, I reached out to this one school that I heard about, and I actually requested that if we could have some students join in as well. So I'm sort of trying to combine the AI and the student piece. But I'm going to be on the lookout for interesting uses. I would love to get like Ron Becchetto back on the show. Ron's been doing some really interesting things with his work around possibility thinking, creating these chatbots which allow, and he does a lot of fine tuning in the background. I mean, he's been coding in Python. I mean, he's doing stuff that he had never thought he would ever do. But he's creating these bots, which is like a Janus bot. He has a possibility thinking bot, which, like, if you give an idea, Janus bot will give you like the opposite of the idea as a way of sort of sparking creative thinking. So he used to go do these workshops, right, around creativity when he had all these sort of techniques, and he's trying to embed these techniques in these bots that he has created. You do need the paid version of GPT to be able to play with them. But I think we just sort of are trying to get him to teach a class in fall of 24, a doctoral seminar which would focus on creativity, possibility thinking, and AI. And so I would love to get some people who are thinking differently about it, which might be interesting, rather than, whatever, right? So let's see. I would love to get a sort of a set of shows around this intersection of AI and creativity in particular, sort of paralleling the ones that we did with creativity back, I think, a couple of years ago. So that'll be fun. And then, it's selfishly interesting for me,
Climate change, certainly in the first year in particular, the first year and a half, we really emphasized that a lot, and rightly so. I think we could revisit some of that to see if newer things are coming out that speak to climate change in new ways. I have colleagues at Harvard who are looking at the role of hope in climate change. That you watch some of these documentaries, and at the end of the documentary, you just feel like crawling under the bed because the situation is so grim. And then the documentary actually accomplishes the opposite of what it's trying to accomplish, which is to say, we can still turn this around, change your behavior, talk to other people, feel a sense of hope. So I think there would be some creative things that we could do in looking at climate change, not again kind of relentlessly documenting that it's there. I think at this point anybody who's open-minded is convinced that it's there. But what are some creative ways that we can think about having people learn and actually change their behavior related to it? That would be a nice thing.
Yeah, so we have a group here at the Teachers College, which has a network, so just sort of quite a large network across the world now around sustainability in education, and climate change, of course, features heavily in that. So I might be able to talk to them and see if they have some. I don't want it to be too ASU centered, just because, right? But they would know people who might be interesting to have as guests working in that space.
And Chris, you're working on a number of shows from a competition of some kind. You want to explain what that is?
Yeah, the World Economic Forum each year identifies what they call lighthouse projects in K-12 education. And because they are the World Economic Forum, what they're specifically looking at is K-12 education that helps prepare students for the future workplace, not for today's workplace or yesterday's workplace, but the world of the future. I'm going to be one of the judges this year, which means I'll be exposed to a variety of projects that people feel have promise and helping to sort out which might actually rise to the level of getting named. But in the course of just seeing even who's in the mix, there may be some interesting examples that would be good targets for episodes of Silver Lining for Learning. So I'll put in my time as a judge, and then I'll mine what I found and talk to all of us as co-hosts. We'll talk about it, and perhaps we'll have some shows that come out of either Lighthouse Project selections or Lighthouse Project runners-up.
Cool.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm continuing to do research on ChatGPT for language learning, so I'm on the lookout for. I mean, we had the two guys who are polyglots in a few months ago, as you might recall. There are others that I could bring in, maybe a combined, from who are teaching various languages all around the world. I could bring in a few people that way, but I've been thinking about it. I'm trying to get the right people that have the personalities that would intermix really well. Yeah, I've got several strands of research going on there, and two just new ones picking up this week, actually. So what's interesting as we interview these folks, Punya, the one thing that everyone wants is more conversational partners like your Punya chat bot.
Well, I mean, to me, that's actually one of the biggest risks in that space, is the fact that these can emulate conversational agents, can fake and fool emotions which they don't actually have. And the power that has to manipulate us in a world which is already awash with misinformation. I mean, we are seeing this. We are seeing this in Argentina. We are seeing this in other countries where AI-generated content is being used to mislead people. There are huge vested interests in this space who do not have the best interests of everybody in mind, right? Who have very strong, and they have money and resources, and this is incredibly easy now to create content which is very realistic looking, but is completely fake. And the consequences of that on our social and political systems. And that's what I meant when I started in the beginning. And the consequences of that then will be to clean up that mess, will be left to education. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's how I think it affects education rather than affecting education directly. It does so by changing the whole world around us. And now educators are left holding the bag saying like, okay, now what do we do? So I just think, so yeah, there's lots of topics here that we can explore. So do you guys have any fun plans for the break now that we are finally getting a little bit of a break from this? I know, Chris, you just got back from some traveling.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to not traveling over the break and enjoying just being with my family and friends in this area. I used to do an enormous amount of travel, and I know that everyone else as a co-host still is doing enormous amounts of travel. Maybe it's just a developmental thing where I've reached a stage in my life development that I no longer either want to put up with the hassle or don't have the same sense of adventure, or maybe it's because of online that now I don't have to travel in order to be able to have at least some level of impact. So I'm going to have the most boring holidays among the four co-hosts. I'm sure of that.
No. I take great pride in grading papers every Thanksgiving. I used to grade them in line at Disney with my kids at Thanksgiving time. I'm a pretty boring person at Thanksgiving, but after Thanksgiving, I'm headed to Japan. And I'm like you, Chris, I'm making the trip really simple. It's Western Japan, Matsui, and I'm going to visit one other city close by. But I used to go to 2 countries when I do that. You know, I would be more adventurous. And I'm finding, after almost being kidnapped in Saudi Arabia a dozen years ago, I'm really, cautious about, and having pilots that couldn't find the runways and flat tires on the runways. Every 12 trips in a row was something of an adventure. It was 2011. Ever since then, I'm really cautious about my travel and where I'm going and who's going to pick me up and who I'm going to talk to. I'll mention one last thing before we're going to have to go here in a second. But yesterday, someone said, you got to watch this video. Sam Altman got this award from, the Hawking Award, the Hawking Fellow Award. So he just gives this brilliant speech, short speech, and all these questions. And well, that was really inspired, actually. I didn't find the language, the lingo that he used appealing, but I thought he had good answers for most of the questions. And then, within an hour, he was fired. Things change quickly in this space.
Well, the two are related, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The fact that he was trying to change the world as opposed to maximize profits may well have been what led to his being fired.
Yeah. Punya, you want to wrap up today's show and lead us to the next one?
Sure. So in terms of travel, I am actually headed to Florida on Monday that's where we are doing our Thanksgiving this year. First time, not doing it at home, but we'll be with the kids and everything. And then I have a trip to Romania coming up and then a trip to Michigan. So I have a little bit of travel. It should be done by mid-December. And then I'm going to have a nice boring time here in Arizona, which I'm looking forward to because the weather is gorgeous now. So this is the time to visit. If you plan to visit, especially if you're in Boston or Indiana, come by. December is the time to be here. Apart from that, I just want to take a moment to thank the two of you and Yang Zhao for this adventure. I mean, I was talking with Zhao, like I said, with Zhao's son yesterday, and he said, you guys have been doing this for almost 3 years. And I don't think we could have done this if it weren't for the fact that we enjoy each other's company, if it weren't for the fact that we are sort of aligned enough that we don't get into fights, but enough differences of opinion that it actually is a productive and rich conversation.
Punya, almost 4 years, not 3 years, almost 4 years.
Almost 4 years. See, I'm even better.
In March, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you to all of you and all the people who listen and so on. This is meaningful, and this year we did one milestone, which I want to thank all the people who volunteered their time. All of our episodes are now available in podcast format. Going forward, this is going to be something that's part of my workflow, so we will have that available. And I think that the podcast was one thing that we should have done right from the start. That's fine. We now are caught up, and that's great. Hopefully next semester I will have some help who can help promote the show a little bit more on social. So I'm looking forward to that, because I think that given our lives, it's been hard. Just running the show has been impressive enough, but I think that we can do a better job of promoting it, getting more viewership. And then and we have a slew of shows in the past which are great shows, right? So looking forward to that as well. But with that, I want to wish everybody here in this Zoom call, others, a very happy new year. Can't believe I'm saying that in November. And I will see you guys, I'm sure, by email at some point, if not other places. But I just wish you a wonderful break, a happy Thanksgiving, and see you in 2024.
Yep. See everyone in 2024.